what they call judicial overreach and introducing legislation to limit the reach of those rulings. Republican lawmakers claim so-called activist judges are overstepping their authority by blocking parts of President Trump's agenda. Democrats argue it's the president who is overreaching.
These rogue judge rulings are a new resistance to the Trump administration, and the only time in which judges in robes in this number have felt it necessary to participate in the political process rather than to participate in the Article III powers.
Our Republican colleagues want us to believe that simply because the courts are exercising their Article III power, it is a sign of rot in our judicial system, that it is somehow our courts and judges, not the president, who have gone rogue and are overreaching.
We're joined now by Florida Republican Congresswoman Laurel Lee. She is on the House Judiciary Committee, and she took part in today's hearing on judicial power. Congresswoman, thanks for being with us.
Great to see you.
And I do have to ask you, and this, I just want to be clear, we're here to talk about the hearing, but I have to ask you because we learned just a short time ago that the Speaker is sending the House home. So I want to talk to you about that first. Your Republican colleague, Anna Paulina Luna, enlisted help from Democrats and some Republicans, several Republicans, to try to get a vote on allowing proxy voting for new moms and dads. She prevailed over Speaker Johnson, who you voted with. Many Republicans have used proxy voting many times, including in cases so that they could travel to CPAC. Why die on this hill, new parents?
Well, I think it's important to understand the procedural background of what happened today. So, of course, I think there is really a unified concern about making sure that Congress is a place that new parents can serve and mothers can serve. But there's a difference when we start talking about proxy voting. So you're right, during Speaker Pelosi's tenure, proxy voting was used during the COVID pandemic. But once the pandemic ended, it really is the belief, certainly of Republicans in Congress, most of them, that we have a constitutional responsibility to be here in the nation's capital. That's what our founders had in mind, that we would all come from all across the country, from our communities, and engage here in discussion and debate and policy making, and that it's important to have that presence. That being said, I'm a mother. I understand absolutely the need for us to be concerned and try to accommodate the needs of working families and new mothers. So I think what you'll see next is a broader conversation in the House about how we can be hearing and meeting those needs that is short of enabling and enacting proxy voting. There's really no limiting principle if we start doing proxy voting about, what should the conditions or circumstances be. So that's something that we really, I believe, should have hearings about, have a thorough conversation about, and formulate an approach that incorporates really all of the members of the House of Representatives.
Yeah, it is quite the disagreement to watch, I will say. Yeah. But we did have you here. I wanted to talk about this hearing today and this discussion about the judiciary. As you are all saying, there is judicial overreach that is happening. Mm-hmm. And one of the specific and big issues that you all are talking about is this idea of injunctions. When a district court judge can pause a policy while they are maybe ruling against it, or they are taking further action to see where they land, or another court ends up landing on it. When should a district court judge, in your opinion, be able to issue a nationwide injunction?
So the question of the nationwide injunction has been the focus of the hearing all day. And I will say, I am a former judge in Florida. I care deeply about the independence of the judiciary. But it's also true that a judge's authority and jurisdiction is typically limited to the people and the parties and the controversy before that judge. And so the question here is whether the judges who are issuing these nationwide or universal injunctions and effectively stopping a policy, and that's true whether it is coming from the White House or a law that's passed by Congress, are overreaching, or if that is too expansive a view of the role of a single district court judge. And the policy proposals being discussed today included potentially taking those cases to 3-judge panels, expediting appellate review, things that would still afford the opportunity for those cases to be heard in court, but provide greater assurance that they were being considered in depth outside of that temporary injunction stage. And also noteworthy point is that this is not the first time this issue has been in front of Congress. The kind of structural changes we're talking about really are applicable regardless of the party that's in the majority or in the White House.
The case in the forefront right now, though, has to do with this case that Judge Boasberg is overseeing, which has to do with these deportations to El Salvador. Specifically, we saw of Venezuelan citizens. I do want to ask you, though, because there was a case last year where a Texas district court judge temporarily blocked the Biden administration from granting legal status to undocumented immigrants who were married to American citizens. There was a nationwide injunction in that case, and in that specific case, the ruling was in favor of 16 Republican states who were suing the Biden administration, and they were joined by the Trump-aligned America First Legal, which was then led by its founder, Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller had sought relief from the district court judge. He certainly did not complain in that instance that this nationwide injunction took over the role of the executive. But he is in this case with Judge Boasberg. How is this current argument against injunctions by the administration, by Republicans, then, a principled argument?
Well, and I would also point out that back in that moment you're talking about, when it was an injunction against the Biden administration advocated for by Mr. Miller, Democrats in Congress and Democrats out in the public square were complaining about the overreach of these nationwide injunctions. So
sure,
the reality
and we'll
is
talk
that when
about
we
that
talk
in a
about
moment. But I want to ask you, on the flip side here, Republicans. So, and you are one. So talk to me about that.
Well, and that is why when we talk about examining the role of the courts, the independence of the judiciary, the separation of powers, the proper functioning of each of those three branches of government, it should be something that we think about in nonpartisan terms. Because whatever we do, and it is a proper function of Congress to think about the bounds of judicial, about jurisdiction, about the role of the courts, it is a proper function of Congress. But we need to think about that with this view in mind. It should absolutely be a nonpartisan analysis. What should the role of the courts be? What should the structure of the courts be? What are the procedural requirements? Or when is appellate review available? That should be something that we're thinking about with the long-term view that is going to be fundamentally the system that works the best for the public, that we can get these cases heard and we can get results, we can get clarity, but it needs to be something that works in this administration, works in the next, regardless of who is in the White House.
Okay, so something that is different here is you have the White House calling Boasberg the radical left. He isn't. He was initially appointed to the bench by Bush, right? You have them calling for his impeachment. That is something we didn't see on the other side. But I do have to ask you, because to be clear, to your point, Democratic administrations have also taken issue with injunctions. And that's something that actually made me think of another story that we're covering today, which was the use of the tush push in the NFL. I know you've been busy, but stay with me here because I promise I'm going to make it germane to our conversation. It's that controversial play that can give a team advantage when used effectively. How can Americans take any of you seriously, but especially Republicans today, when the rhetoric is certainly different, when you're only against the tush push when the other team is using it to advantage?
Well, I will just acknowledge that I have no idea what the tush push is, but what I do know is that when the Supreme Court issued the Dobbs opinion, there were absolutely calls from Democrats for impeachments, for reviews, for throwing them out of office. There were even threats of violence made against the justices. So unfortunately, and I am a believer that we all need to think about the independence of the judiciary, that it is not true that this is a Republican issue. This is something that has been discussed by Republicans and Democrats alike, depending upon what the courts were doing and what the rulings at issue were. And what I think that says is that this cries out for really bipartisan analysis and solutions that are going to work for Republicans and Democrats and the public, regardless of what the issue of the day. And that's the key about really effectively being on the bench, is that you're there to apply the law, what the law says, regardless of whether it's an easy day or a hard day or who the party is that's in front of you. That is really the mark of a judicial system that's working, is when it's the same regardless. The judge's political beliefs are set aside at the door and the law should operate the same.
All right, we'll see if you all come together against all injunctions. I suspect that may not happen, but Congresswoman Laurel Lee, thank you so much for being with us.
It was great to see you.